Hello, everybody. It's me, the Blue Princess 590, here again once again to start the. I think this is my not fifth, like sixth episode. Yeah, I think this is the sixth episode of my podcast, The Mad Ramblings of a Blue Princess. Now then, for this episode, we are going to continue talking about my replay of Kingdom Hearts 1. Now, in my very first episode of the podcast, I've talked about, of course, the the first part of my replay of Kingdom Hearts 1, and we ended off finishing sorry, Deep Jungle, Tarzan's world. And for the next part, we'll be starting with the revisit to Traverse Town. Now then, first thing I want to talk about is that I really love the red Trinity mark. Like, I think it's just really funny, the animation of basically like Sora, Donald, and Goofy. I don't know why I said Koopy. Who's Koopy? Fucking rejected Disney character, Koopy. Koopy the Goopy the hamster, the rejected Disney character, who was recalled for being too racist. He kept making racist remarks, so he was unfortunately fired by Disney. I'm being so stupid right now. Anyway, right back to Kingdom Hearts. Anyway, besides the red Trinity marks, I went once basically the red Trinity marks are used in the second visit to Traverse Town, so we can finally enter the sewer in which we find the secret waterway. And I really like the design of this area because it reminds me of a lot of like those classic dungeons you see in a Final Fantasy game. Just it has this sort of very atmospheric look to it. It's also very bizarre because like there's the weird green flooring everywhere, the sort of, and then there's the mysterious like night sky painting over to the right. Like it all feels mysterious. It feels very bizarre, and it's got like a cool atmosphere that I really like. And another thing that I noticed that I thought was interesting is Leon kind of acts like a mentor figure for Sora in Kingdom Hearts 1, with him basically giving Sora all sorts of different information about like the importance of the Keyblade, informing him about locking up the keyholes, and he also even gives Sora Earthshine, which is our first summon in the game as Simba. In general, I really like this aspect of Leon. I think it was very interesting that they made him the sort of mentor figure for Sora in this game. In general, I think they have Sora and Leon have overall pretty strong chemistry to each other. I also really love how they incorporate Leon's like dot 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 from Final Fantasy VIII, but I'd like how they kind of use them a bit more comedically in Kingdom Hearts, with them often being used when Leon just doesn't have an answer for Sora's questions, so he just ends up he's stuck in thought trying to think it through. I don't know, just generally really funny stuff. I also really kind of like how like summons are used in Kingdom Hearts 1 with the summon gems, and that they're created when someone with a strong enough heart loses their world to darkness. And that and I like it because it's another way in which the series like shows off its core theme of hearts, of like the power of hearts and the fact that they're able to do anything, but it also comes across this idea the heart is capable of existing even beyond a physical body, which will be important as the series goes on and they later delve into these more things of like what it means to have a heart, and like what exactly is a heart beyond the body. Like, because this is something that goes into much more emphasis in later games. But yeah, in general, I really like this, and I gotta say, it's a little bit sad that they sort of keep this element, but then again, I guess it wouldn't make sense in later games for them to keep like the summon gems, because of course, like in the future games, they're not being like the Heartless aren't destroying worlds and going in this major invasion like the future games. Like the Heartless are still invading worlds in later games, but it's not quite as in Kingdom Hearts 1, in which like it's already like a massive where the main conflict in Kingdom Hearts 1 is specifically the Heartless are invading, whereas in other games, well, the Heartless are still invading other games. That's not the main conflict of those games, but rather the main conflict of those games is that. Sorry, let me say this again. Rather, the Heartless invasions in those games is a byproduct of the real conflict of those games. Anyway, yeah. Um. Anyway, after of course you get the stones, of course you're meant to go to Merlin's place so that you can have the fairy godmother turn the stone into the Simba summon, and also so that you can deliver a mysterious book that Sid asked you to Merlin. I didn't explain that really well. Let me try again. Basically, you're going to Merlin's place to deliver a book from Sid to Merlin that Merlin gave to Sid earlier in order to help fix it. Okay, yeah, but um, talking about Merlin's house, I really like how the entrance to it is like on the side rather than the front. It's like another way of conveying this idea that Merlin himself is this very like kooky and strange wizard. But yeah, and next up, so we give the book to Merlin, and we find out that it's the Hundred Acre Woods book, aka the Winnie the Pooh book. And I really love how Merlin establishes that like he doesn't own the book; it just showed up mysteriously in his bag one day because it really like conveys this idea that this book is has a mind of its own and that it's much more mysterious than we think. The fact that Merlin, who's established as this very powerful wizard who has traveled between different worlds freely whenever he wants, which is sort of like a big deal in Kingdom Hearts, doesn't even know where this book came from. That basically showed up out of nowhere. So it makes the Hundred Acre Woods really mysterious and sort of it gives it this own like added depth to its own lore, which I really like. Like like and also just in general the idea of like a book itself having its own heart being its own world is very interesting so because it kind of has this idea of like fiction and stories being worlds in their own right like because the main theme of Kingdom Hearts is that hearts exist everywhere. So the idea that a heart exists within a very storybook, and that this storybook itself can become its own literal world, just very fascinating. Especially because this podcast is meant to focus mainly on Kingdom Hearts One. I will talk about later games if it's relevant to stuff I'm talking about now. But yeah, currently the next saga, Kingdom Hearts, is going to introduce the idea of a realm of unreality, which is basically like these worlds that are considered fictional to the characters in Kingdom Hearts. And it's interesting that this sort of idea even lays place even in the first game with the Hundred Acre Woods being a storybook that's a literal world of its own right. Okay, now then back to Kingdom Hearts 1 itself specifically. Having the fairy godmother be the one who activates the summon stones for Sora is a really good idea because like the fairy godmother if you're familiar with Cinderella, her powers are basically the idea about making dreams come true and granting wishes, but only temporarily, of course. And it's fitting that she's the one that allows the summons, like the spirit, the hearts trapped within the summon stones to become real again and regain physical body for a temporary time, because that's how her powers sort of work. So having her powers applied to the dream stones, I mean that's how you work the summons in Kingdom Hearts 1 is just again very smart and very interesting. Um Next up, I absolutely adore the Hundred Acre Woods in Kingdom Hearts and how it's always used, specifically in number games, because each instance in which this world appears is used specifically to convey the main themes of the game. And in Kingdom Hearts 1, they do this by paralleling Sora's journey with Pooh's, since at the start of the Hundred Acre Woods, Pooh has already lost all his friends just like Sora. And so as you're reclaiming the pages to fix the book, you're helping reunite Pooh with his friends, which is the Sora's main goal. He's trying to reunite with Kairi and Riku. So again, they have this parallel between Sora and Pooh, which I really like because the idea of like using like sort of the cutesy minigame world specifically in order to give a more in-depth exploration of the game's overall theme and Sora's character arc is just a really clever idea on Nomura and his team's part. Like I really love that. And also the dialogue in the Hundred Acre Woods is without a doubt some of the best in the series. Like I love the part where Pooh is asking Sora how he can say goodbye to himself because Pooh is already sort of contemplating the idea that if everyone else has already disappeared, he'll eventually disappear too. And now he's trying to like comfort that fact by asking how is he going to say goodbye to himself, which is like it's so depressing and melancholy, but also very whimsical and fantastical. Sort of like it's Kingdom Hearts itself sort of embodied in this one scene, and that's why I love the Hundred Acre Woods in every game it shows up in. Well, every Never game it shows up in because it does show up in the non-Never games, but it's usually like it's not quite as good because I know it's like a short world in Recom, and I think it's basically like it's not even a mini game world in Birth by Sleep. It's basically just a board game for the for one of the mini games you do in Birth by Sleep, which is a bit disappointing. But anyway, back to Kingdom Hearts 1 itself. The scene where Sora and Riku reunite in Traverse Town after you leave Merlin's place is fantastic. With and I everything about it. I just love Sora like making Riku basically grabbing Riku's face to see if he's real and then like putting his fingers in his mouth so he has a big goofy smile just to see if Riku's real, because like it's both really funny, but it's also kind of sad because like it's basically emotional because Sora's not even sure if Riku's real because earlier because throughout the game Sora has thought he saw Kairi, but that wasn't real. So now he wants to make sure this Riku's real. But again, it's all super silly because Sora's like grabbing Riku's face and making him do like all these goofy smiles. Again, really good stuff. And then there's the part where Riku seems a bit unconcerned about Kairi still being missing, just insisting that like she's probably looking for them or that they'll find her no deal, which is like a really good way of showing that Riku has become he's focused more on his new freedoms rather than his desire to perfect his friends. So basically his selfish desire for freedom has degraded his true ideals by this point even further, which again, good subtle characterization. I also love the part where Riku is taken aback by Sora's new confidence and the friends he's made almost threatened at it, because it's very clear that in Kingdom Hearts 1, Riku has sort of like based his confidence around the fact that he is on some level Sora superior, and that he kind of relies on Sora for validation in order to feel more confident in his own place in the world. And so the idea of Sora sort of growing beyond him and gaining new friends is like a big threat to Riku's sense of self, which again is all very interesting. And I also love the part where Riku takes the Keyblade from Sora, like a fantastic piece of foreshadowing that Riku is the original master of the Keyblade. Not master, sorry, wrong. He's the Keyblade's original wielder, that the Keyblade was meant for him. Again, really good way of foreshadowing this. Basically, after that, Riku disappears, and the rest of your second visit to Trial Town is focused on a rematch with an earlier boss. And basically, in order to and you're also trying to find the keyhole, of course, which is at least the boss. But basically, the rest of the second vision of Travis Town is based around finding the keyhole. And part of what you have to do to find the keyhole is to ring the bell in Traverse Town at least 3 times so the keyhole will show up. And I like how it's specifically 3 times because it's once again bringing up this recurring motif in Kingdom Hearts 1 of Trinities. I also like how they hint at this with the 3 bell icons near the bell tower. I really like the fight against the opposite armor, which is basically like a rematch against the guard armor, but all of its pieces have been sort of switched around. Because similar to how the first fight was basically there to show that like Sora, Donald, and Goofy's like Trinity was a true trio against a false trio, this rematch is sort of here to show how much Sora, Donald, and Goofy have grown as a trio between their adventures and worlds. And it's very smart to have this play specifically after Deep Jungle, which is a world in which Sora and Donald were fighting, in which their trio was basically like their ability to stay together was basically being put under stress. But now that they've been able to overcome that conflict, they've grown closer, and now they're able to defeat the opposite armor. Just really cool stuff. Love seeing that, and love this part in Kingdom Hearts 1. Even though I feel like the later games like sort of write Sora, Donald, and Goofy's chemistry better, I do like how we see their bond sort of form and develop in Kingdom Hearts 1. It's all very good stuff, very smart stuff. Loves to see it. Um, I also one thing I haven't noticed before is that the Traverse Town theme sounds kind of like the music you'd hear in a coffee shop, like very soothing, very relaxing, which I like because Traverse Town is basically meant to be sort of the hub world in Kingdom Hearts 1. So it helps add a bit more relaxing aspect to visiting this world. I also like how Traverse Town is like constantly in a state of nighttime to contrast Destiny Island, which we saw mostly during the daytime. And of course, though, it's a tropical island, so we associate that with summer and, like, of course, the sun and daytime and stuff. With Traverse Town, it's like always at night, always cool, very strong way to contrast it. Also, after you see the keyhole, there's a later scene which we see everybody hanging out in Sid's new house, and I love how Sid just sort of casually brings up Maleficent. It's just so goofy, like this way it's sort of arranged. And back to Maleficent, I really like the relationship that Maleficent has with Riku, where she sort of feeds on his insecurities and envies, and basically like sort of pushes him more towards darker actions while framing herself as a maternal figure, which is basically like I said, she is Riku's dark maternal figure. She's the one feeding all of his insecurities, saying the right things to make him upset, and sort of pushing him down a more aggressive and dark path, which is a fantastic way of contrasting Sora's bond with Donald and Goofy, who I feel like they are more parental figures towards Sora in later games, but they definitely do have like that sort of like good Goofy dad energy still in Kingdom Hearts 1. So I really love how this contrasts how Sora ends up befriending Disney characters that become these sort of positive role models in his life, whereas Riku gets like a dark, manipulative, cruel, maternal figure. Again, really good stuff. We later gonna get a scene in which Pinocchio shows up in shop before we go to the monster world, and it's interesting, but I definitely have to ask, how the heck did Pinocchio get here? Or how did he like get out of Monstro? Like because like Geppetto hasn't finished building the gummy ships yet, so how can he be here? And I think that if I recall correctly, this scene wasn't in the original game, but they added it in Final Mix because when in the original game, when the gang goes to Monstro, they act like they've already met Pinocchio, even though that doesn't make sense because they haven't. So they added this scene in the Final Mix version to sort of explain why they're already familiar with Pinocchio, even though it doesn't make sense how Pinocchio got there. But then again, maybe one could make a headcanon that Pinocchio is there because Geppetto was able to make a smaller gummy ship and he sort of tested it out. Like Pinocchio like was sort of like the test pilot for it, and that's why he ended up in Traverse Town. That begs the question: how did he get back to Monstro? Yeah, it's a bit weird. Definitely not the best part of writing this game, but it's overall a really minor scene, so it doesn't matter. And we also get to see more screen time for Jiminy, which is always good in my book. Next up, we once again travel to another Disney World after finishing our second visit to Traverse Town, in which we meet Agrabah. I mean, which we go to the world of Agrabah. I don't said why we meet Agrabah, so you don't meet worlds. Bleh. But yeah, this is my favorite Disney World in Kingdom Hearts 1. Specifically because I love how this world is designed, to which it's because their previous worlds want you to explore, but they oftentimes feel very boxed in or too small, or they end up being really confusing. But Agrabah is a world in which it's not only is it open enough for you to explore things solidly enough, but there's a lot of good platforming that makes it a lot easier to explore the world. And it's also like not so and it's a lot easier to navigate. There's a lot less places where you can get confused and not sure what to do, like in previous worlds. Like Deep Jungle is a very confusing world to navigate your first time because you very much have a problem which you don't know what to do, and there's a lot of backtracking. Whereas Agrabah, not only is it fairly easy to understand where you're supposed to go to, but there's very little backtracking in it. You're always going to like a new area, so it feels like you're really going on an adventure in this world, and the world itself feels like it's fun to explore, especially when you get to the the later parts in the level. I'll talk in that bit of more depth once we get to it, but yeah. I really like when we first enter Agrabah, it starts right off the bat with a Heartless fight. Because when you get to the world, you see a cutscene in which establishes that Jafar has already taken over the world with the Heartless. So when we're going to this world, we are basically like, we are entering enemy territory at this point, which is a big step up from the previous worlds in which, well, the Heartless were invading the Disney villains. They weren't completely in control. Like they were fighting for control, but they weren't the ones in charge yet. But this world, we are now fighting a world that has already been taken over by the Disney villains and the Heartless. So now then it's a step, it's basically like a step up in stakes and danger for the characters, which is fitting because like we've already seen their growth to this part. Now it's time for them to get bigger challenges. But yeah. I really like how the Heartless are designed to fit the aesthetic of Agrabah with the fire breathing bigger Heartless who got like the new apparel to match the world, and the swordsman Heartless who are like sort of all designed again, not only to aesthetically fit the world they're in, like they're all designed to wear the same clothing that the characters in Aladdin wear, and of course they're wearing those same weaponry that Aladdin himself uses in the game. So again, though, I really like that we have in Kingdom Hearts 1 Heartless specifically designed to fit the specific aesthetic of a world, because it not only makes them feel like they fit this world specifically, but sort of like gives this the idea that perhaps these Heartless themselves originated from these worlds. Like these Heartless were created from the hearts of the people residing in this world, so that's why they sort of take the shape of the aesthetics of this world. But perhaps there's another idea that maybe the Heartless follow their own sense of world order, so they change to fit the sort of worlds they invade and enter. Like, I don't know, I'm probably just spitballing here, but like that would be an interesting idea if even the Heartless themselves had their own sense of world order to follow. Um, Yeah, and I basically already talked how I really like how this world opens in a way to let you know you're in enemy territory. Next up, I really like the how crooked the camera is in the alleyway, since it's a really good way of making it not only easier to see enemies in this tight area, but also does a really good job making the players feel uncomfortable because this is the scene in which Sora himself first sees first meets Jafar, and he sends a horde of Heartless to attack Sora after he already kidnaps Jafar. I'm not Jafar. Uh, Jasmine. After he kidnaps Jasmine. So again, all this the camera work does a really good way of making the player feel just as uncomfortable as Sora himself feeling. Um, After that, we finally we finally get to see Sora meet Aladdin, and I think this scene is fantastic because it really shows Aladdin as this confident treasure hunter and adventurer, which I like because it makes him sort of in another ideal for Sora to look up to, similar to Hercules, but this time as an adventurer instead of a hero. Because like Aladdin, basically Hercules is Sora's hero icon, the ideal he's supposed to follow if he wants to become a true hero, whereas Aladdin is Sora's adventure icon, the one in which needs to follow and become a better adventurer. Because at the beginning of the game, it's established that Sora wanted to leave his world and discovered other worlds and go on adventures. So Aladdin himself is sort of that adventurer that Sora on some level wants to be. So I really like how they established Aladdin as the sort of ideal adventurer for Sora, and I also love how they give him this sort of relationship of a of where Aladdin is basically like Sora's older brother type figure. And well, this is established somewhat in Kingdom Hearts 1. It's not till later games in which they really go into it, which I really like, which we'll get to when I eventually do a podcast on Kingdom Hearts 2. But yeah, I really like the relationship that they established between Sora and Aladdin in Kingdom Hearts 1 and how it goes on further. The scene with where the genie's introduced is also great because the animators do a really good job of sort of capturing the cartoony nature of Genie from the movie. They go a lot of a way to make him very expressive and goofy and incorporate his more like wacky cartoony actions. Like having him like use three models of Genie to make it look like he's copying himself when the cutscene and stuff. All general very good stuff. I also think it's really interesting how Genie mentions that he heard about the keyhole from 100 years ago, which I does Genie know more than we're leading on? Was Genie involved in? Did Genie meet Keyblade wielders in the past? Does Genie know more than what he's leading on? Does he know stuff that he's forgot? Does he know important Kingdom Hearts lore that he's forgotten due to being in the lamp for decades? What are you not telling us, Nomura? Anyway, yeah. I think it's okay. I also we later once again we return to the main city of Agrabah. We return to Agrabah actually because like when we met Aladdin was out in the desert, and I think it's really silly that like Aladdin basically loses his second wish to save Jasmine because Jafar sent a Yu-Gi-Oh to take away the lamp. So like once the lamp's gone, the wish is undone even before it's be finished. Like what? Or like Genie just stops doing the wish because somebody else has the lamp. I don't know. It feels a little bit silly. It's a little silly that Aladdin basically loses this wish because somebody grabbed the lamp out of his hand when the wish was being granted. It's kind of silly. But yeah, once that's done, we eventually have to go to the Cave of Wonders to fight Jafar and save Jasmine. But unfortunately, we have to do a really lame boss fight before we can actually go inside the Cave of Wonders, in which we have to fight the lion head first, which has apparently been taken over by the Heartless. Which that itself, I do think, is an interesting idea that these powerful supernatural creatures integral to the world can even be taken over by the darkness that the Heartless possess. So it's a really good sort of way of like showing that even that anything in Kingdom Hearts can be corrupted by the darkness. But the problem is this like a really lame boss fight in which you gotta jump on the lion head in order to whack the eyes until the darkness is gone. Just like it's an interesting idea, but the execution is unfortunately really lame. But yeah. But yeah, once we defeat that boss, we can actually enter the Cave of Wonders, and I freaking love the Cave of Wonders. Like, it's probably the first level in the game that makes you feel like you're actually like in an old school JRPG dungeon. Like the way it's sort of set up, the traps, the different enemies you have to fight, the puzzles you have to solve, the fact that it's filled with all sorts of treasures to find. Just in general, the aesthetic and the way the whole thing is set up really makes you feel like you're in the dungeons you would see in an old school JRPG. Just really good stuff. And eventually, after we go through the dungeon, there's a cutscene in which basically like Jafar and Maleficent are talking about their plans, and then Sora goes by and Maleficent disappears. And it brings me up to this point that I think is really interesting and also kind of weird is the fact that I don't think Sora ever really figures out that the different Disney villains were working together in Kingdom Hearts 1. Like, he knows, like, Maleficent is, like, the sort of big bad orchestrating the Heartless, but he doesn't really know, he doesn't really put one and two together that Maleficent and all these other Disney villains he's fighting in the Disney worlds are all working together. Like, it is a bit weird. I mean, it's just we don't have to have Sora sort of figure this out. It's sort of weird that we set up this, like, council of Disney villains all working together, and the protagonist has no idea that he's taking them down one by one. He just sort of thinks Maleficent is the one behind all this. Like, I don't know. Maybe Sora does put two and two together when he sees, Maleficent with Jafar, but he never brings that up in-game, so, I don't know. Maybe the journal does clarify that Sora figures out the Disney villains are working together, but it's never said within the actual cutscenes of the game itself. So it sort of comes across to me like Sora never figured this out, which is a bit weird. But anyway, we get a first boss fight with Jafar in which he's just sort of using his magic, and it's really annoying because Jafar keeps flying around the place and you keep having to jump around so you can hit him, and it's just kind of annoying. But I do think it's cool that like Genie himself is also part of this fight, where he's like sort of trying to attack everybody, but he's constantly giving warnings before he gives an attack and telling the guys to look out. So it is kind of fun. You can also tell that he's not really putting his full heart in the fight. But yeah, that's one of the fun parts I like of a very sort of annoying boss fight. And then Jafar uses the lamp to turn himself into a genie. And it's a bit weird that they removed the part where Aladdin himself specifically tricks Jafar into making that wish. But what you gonna do? Besides, in here, it's framed less like Jafar himself, like Jafar is being tricked, and more that Jafar himself is sort of giving in to his power-lusting actions, which will lead to his own downfall, even if he doesn't specifically become a Heartless. Like, or even if it's not specifically the Heartless that end up being his own end, it's still his own it's still the dark. Basically, let me start over. Basically, the darkness within Jafar's heart that leads him to be greedy and selfish and vain is still ultimately what brings about his downfall, even if he's not specifically taken out by the Heartless or turned into a Heartless. Again, because that's how basically they use Jafar turning into a genie in this game. It's less about Jafar being tricked by his arrogance, and more about the darkness within Genie's heart leading to his own downfall. Dice say Genie's downfall, not Jafar's downfall. Blah. Words are getting mixed up, but yeah. The fight now back to the actual fight. The fight against Genie Jafar is like really disappointing because because throughout the fight, he doesn't really do a lot of crazy stuff. He's just sort of shooting fireballs at you. Well, you have to avoid him to focus on hitting Iago, who has the lamp. Because the idea is you need to beat the lamp off Iago so that you can finally imprison Jafar. Which is I don't know. It's just not. I feel like you could have done a lot more with a boss fight against the Genie Jafar, and what we got here is like a fairly middling boss fight. It's also kind of annoying how the platforms are constantly moving throughout the game, so it feels like you're sort of at the mercy of the platforms, and you gotta wait till they move in just the right place so that you can target Iago. But I do like how we get Fiara after defeating Genie Jafar, since he's he's attacking using all fire attacks. And I think we also got Blizzara before this. Blizzara before this, when after you finished the boss fight against normal human Jafar just using magic. Which, yeah, cool stuff. I really like that. I really like how in the Kingdom Hearts games, when you acquire a new spell, it's specifically tied to a boss that either had that sort of element or an event in the story that sort of connects to that element. Yeah, I also like how after we defeat Genie Jafar, we get our first Ansem report. Because, of course the villains are using these different Ansem reports, since it's already established at the beginning of the game that they know a bunch about the Heartless, and as Ansem, who was established at the beginning of the game, was the guy researching the Heartless. So, of course, the villains are sort of using his notes to take over the Heartless. So, yeah, good stuff. I really do like how they never flat out state that the villains have been, using they're not like, haha, with Anson's reports, we will surely be able to take over the world with the Heartless. But rather, the game like lets us know that they were the ones keeping hold of his reports and sort of using them for their own plots by like just having Sora get it after the boss fight. And also now I think about it, it is really clever that the villains had the Anson reports because it foreshadows a later plot point. Actually, no, wait, it doesn't really foreshadow a later plot point because they already mentioned earlier that Maleficent had taken over the homeworld of the FF characters. So yeah, I guess that isn't really foreshadowing that their base is in Anson's homeworld. But yeah, sorry for the dumb rambling. Yeah, still cool. I like how they do handle the Ansem reports in Kingdom Hearts 1. And I love how like we still see Aladdin using his last wish to free Genie instead of bring Jasmine back. And why I like this scene is because like I think it's not only here to show that Aladdin is a man of his world as he doesn't break his promise with Jafar. I mean not Jafar. He doesn't break his earlier promise with Genie where he said he would use his last wish to free him, even though Genie himself has established that he's perfectly fine if Aladdin uses his wish to save Jafar instead. But instead, we see Aladdin sort of putting his personal desires aside in order to stay true to to not only his word but his friend, which again really sweet. But I also like this because I think it's a nice way of showing that like Aladdin has total faith that Sora will be able to save Jasmine. That he doesn't feel the need to use the wish because he knows Sora and gang will be able to bring her back, which is cute stuff. Um, I also want to point out in the scene in which basically like Aladdin asks Genie to go with Sora, Donald, and Goofy to help save Jasmine. I do think it's a little bit weird that cutscene sort of frames it like Genie is going to be joining the party when he's really just a summon. Like I could definitely, it's definitely, I could obviously be overthinking it, but it definitely does seem a little bit because like when I first saw the cutscene, I thought Genie was going to be joining the party, but he's just a summon, and it is a bit weird that he's just a summon because like he's specifically being asked to go along with the guy, so you're assuming that he's traveling with them. But the fact that he's a summon makes it more seem like the gangs are just summoning him from his world to come join them when they need in a fight. Like I get why they do that because like again he was made to be a summon, not a party member, and they probably don't want to like add Genie to a bunch of cutscenes later in the game because that would be more difficult. Not only having to write for another character, but also having to animate another character into all these scenes and stuff. So yeah, I get why they don't do it. But yeah, I think it's so crazy cool that we get us that our second Disney summon is a character we already went on a big adventure with. Really makes the summons feel a little bit more natural and gives them a bit more pathos. Again, really cool stuff. I also think it's been interesting how the game draws a parallel between Aladdin and Sora with them both losing the girls they love. And I think it's probably because of this why Aladdin becomes one of Sora's like closer Disney friends. I love how the Keyblade you get after finishing Agrabah is called Three Wishes, not just referencing how Genie can only give you three wishes, but also once again calling back to the recurring motif of three in Kingdom Hearts 1. Um, I also like how the NPCs show up in Agrabah again after you finish the world, because it sort of emphasizes this idea that now that Jafar has gone, the Heartless are no longer in control of this world, so the people are able to live in safety again. It really emphasizes this idea that this is no longer enemy territory. This is a happy world now, which again, really nice, really good way of showing the player Sora's impact on the world. I also really like the Trinity ladder, which is what you use on the green Trinity marks. Like, there's just something so funny about seeing these three goofballs form a ladder out of their bodies. It's just so funny. Um, After you finish Agrabah, you can then revisit Olympus Coliseum, in which you do the Phil Cup, which is the first sort of tournament you can do. Which basically in Olympus Coliseum, you can enter these different tournaments in which you fight waves of different enemies in order to receive a reward at the end. And the reward of the Phil Cup is the spell Gravity, which is my favorite spell in Kingdom Hearts 1. It does a ton of damage, and I absolutely love the squish effect you get where basically like once you use it on an enemy, it'll cause the enemy's like model to like squish down like a cartoon character. It's just really funny. After that, we go to the next world, which is Monstro, as in literally the giant whale from Pinocchio. And I think this is a fairly interesting idea. The fact that Monstro himself not only survived a world, his own world being destroyed, but that he's also big enough to be a literal world, which again is fitting because, like, in the movie, he was a giant ass whale. But also this idea that he's become sort of this cosmic creature of destruction now, just sort of eating whatever he can throughout space. It's just really cool that, like, this one Disney, like, I'm not even sure if Monstro really counts as a villain, but then maybe he should because he was really created as this sort of like monstrous whale in the movie. But yeah, this idea that this Disney monster was not only able to survive destruction of his own world, but is now able to live on as this constant monstrosity is just like, I don't know, it's a really fascinating idea to do in Kingdom Hearts. No, but I also get why they don't do this again because it's like it's kind of difficult to figure out what other Disney monster you would turn into a world itself. But yeah, just something kind of cool. Um, it's also very fitting that the Monstro world opens with a flashback to Sora and Riku's childhood, since this world is going to explore Sora and Riku's relationship a lot. So opening the world with a flashback is a really good way of contrasting the more toxic state of their relationship that we see in the world itself, because the flashback is basically opening to Sora and, like, baby Sora and Riku, like when they were little kids, sort of going to the cave for the first time because Sora thinks there's a monster in it. And again, I really like how this cutscene sort of shows like their innocent, sort of happy-go-lucky friendship in the beginning, and it does a really good way of contrasting the more toxic elements we see of the relationship in the story of Monsters World itself. I also really like how the flashback shows that even as a little kid, Riku has wanted to leave the Islands, and it also doubles down on the fact that Riku associates the idea of leaving other worlds with growing up. So it helps punctuate the idea that the Riku we see now is trying to grow up way too fast. And there's also another really cool detail in this scene where Riku notices the door to the heart of Destiny Island first, which I think is another good way of how the game foreshadows Riku as the Keyblade's original owner. Um, Next up, I really like that Geppetto is trying to build a gummy ship, since not only is it a nice way to tie in his wood carver and toy making talents to the original lore of KH, but it's also just something that's really fun to see in this world, because basically, like, this world is just like we see the characters trapped in the giant whale. It's interesting to see the ways that they try to get out, but the way itself it does it is by using specific elements original to Kingdom Hearts itself. Just good stuff. Um, but yeah, as Sora, Donald, and Goofy sort of explore Monstro, Pinocchio ends up getting lured away from his father by Riku. And I like when the first scene in which we see Riku and Sora interacting again, Riku is mocking Sora by saying stuff like, "I thought you liked games," meaning that he's trying to imply that Sora is childish. He's basically trying to insult Sora by implying that he's like an immature kid. But all this really does is sort of highlights Riku's own immaturity in the scene, which is like really good stuff. I also like the part afterwards when Riku says, "Or are you too cool to hang out with your friends now that you have that Keyblade?" Which is just the game itself further highlighting Riku's jealousy of Sora in this attempt to put him down. Because like Riku is trying to make Sora feel threat, he's trying to put him down and insult him. But all this is really doing is highlighting his own jealousy of Sora and his own immaturity, which again, really good stuff. And then later we end up seeing a scene between Riku and Maleficent. And I like how in this scene, like, Maleficent is, like, trying to give Riku advice. Sort of like about the Heartless, and how he needs to be careful not to let them take his heart. It's all very clearly wrapped around manipulation and abuse tactics. Sort of this way that Maleficent is trying to make Riku feel bad so that she can get him to do what she wants. And again, really good way of furthering this idea that Maleficent is Riku's dark maternal figure. And after that, we then get another scene between Riku and like right after that scene, we get a scene between Riku and Sora in which Riku is trying to guilt trip Sora. And I really like this because I think it's sort of not only highlights how Riku and Sora's friendship has sort of devolving from a friendly rivalry into a much more toxic one, but I also kind of like to think of it as this hinting that Riku is sort of taking after Maleficent and sort of like copying some of her sort of abuse tactics in the scene where Riku is trying to like because he's trying to make Sora feel guilty by bringing up Kairi and claiming that Sora doesn't really care about her anymore and that he doesn't care about them, just his new power, just the Keyblade and his new friends he's make. But it's all very clear that Riku is like, he's trying to make Sora feel bad. He's trying to guilt trip him, which again is in itself an abuse tactic of sorts. And I really do kind of like it as showing sort of like how much Riku is sort of falling, how the toxic, how much more toxic he's becoming, and how toxic the relationship between him and Sora is becoming. Also, the idea that Riku is on some level taking after the negative influences he's been hanging out with. Getting good stuff. Sorry for a bit of the mumbling. I'm trying to get better at it, but sometimes it is a bit difficult. Where I sometimes lose my points and have trouble talking. But let's get back to talking about Kingdom Hearts 1 itself. But yeah, after this scene, we later get a scene in which Pinocchio gets kidnapped by a Heartless within Monstro, the parasite cage. And like we get this cool short boss fight where Riku fights alongside us, and it's really cool. Though Riku technically isn't a party member because we don't see him as part of the HUD, but he is fighting against the monster. He does do damage, and he is our ally at this point. So again, cool stuff. And it actually is pretty interesting how like even though Riku is fighting with us, he's not actually part of the party in this scene. So sort of using the gameplay to sort of highlight the fact that Riku, despite helping Sora in the scene, is truly not on Sora's side, and there's still a disconnect between them. Good stuff. And also, Riku ends up learning Cheer after this boss fight, and I have to wonder if Riku learned it because he got it from Pinocchio screaming in the boss fight. Which, yeah, Pinocchio screaming, "Get me out if you're doing this fight," is kind of annoying. But yeah, one there's also another interesting part where like after that sort of like short boss fight, the music to the world completely stops. And I have to wonder if this is done in order to highlight Sora's own distress and distortion over the current situation. Because not only have they lost Pinocchio again, but Riku has jumped after Pinocchio, and Sora is, of course, confused about this whole situation because Riku himself is doing these sort of like cruel things, but he's also saying all these mean things to Sora. He's being sort of abusive and toxic and trying to put him down. So of course Sora himself would of course be disoriented by this. His best friend, someone who's been looking on this journey, is now like acting like his enemy and being needlessly cruel to people. So of course this is gonna upset Sora and distort his own worldview. Which again, the good stuff. Like maybe that was intentional, maybe that was just a bug, but I like to think that's why there isn't any music in there. After that, we then later get a scene in which Geppetto is asking Riku to give Pinocchio back, only for Riku to refuse because he believes that Pinocchio might be the key to getting Kairi her heart back. And I think it's really interesting how the story itself not only points out that Pinocchio has a heart despite being a puppet, but is also a puppet which further emphasizes the idea that everything in Kingdom Hearts is capable of having a heart, but also the fact that Riku thinks Pinocchio could be the answer to saving Kairi, which is a good way of entangling the lore of the Disney movies and Disney characters to the original world building case. It's a really good idea of way of like sort of taking this idea that like because one of the main things of course in Kingdom Hearts is the idea that everything is capable of having a heart. So again, addressing the fact that Pinocchio is a puppet with a heart is a really good way of sort of tying the themes of the games to the themes of the original movie. Very smart stuff. And I also think it's very fitting that in this scene, Riku isn't really treating Pinocchio like a real person. He doesn't even seem to believe that Pinocchio really has a heart, which I think does a good way of contrasting Riku against Sora, who can like see the hearts and everything thanks to keeping his heart always open, whereas Riku is hesitant to see that he keeps his heart sort of closed off to others and thus is unable to truly understand the true nature of the hearts, which in turn makes his own heart weaker than Sora's. But yeah, I really like that this sort of characterization, really good stuff. I love how it sort of contrasts between Sora and Riku, sort of further highlighting their own rivalry by making them sort of contrast each other in personalities and ideals. But I also have to wonder if Riku's hesitation to see Riku as a real person is meant to imply that Riku is sort of unwilling to see the magic in the worlds around him because he refuses to believe in childish things and believes it's childish to open his heart up to others. So basically, this idea that Riku's own immature desire to seem more adult is making it impossible for him to truly understand the worlds he visits and the people he meets. Which again, maybe that's not what they're going for, but that's how I kind of like to interpret it. And I think it again further asks the contrast between Sora and Riku, which I really like. Also, just need to point out that Riku is doing some mad projection when he accuses Sora of not caring about Kairi, since it's sort of Riku's own actions that endangered Kairi. Um, also, after the scene, we then later get high jump, which is in a chest, which I have to say is kind of weird that the this new ability is just located in a random chest. Since in other games, usually we got abilities because it was tied into specific moments in the story, or because a character who would have that ability gave it to us. So it's a bit weird that since the game has consistently giving us cohesive and natural ways within the story for why we get these abilities, that we just sort of get this ability randomly from a chest. But in the end, it's probably not a good deal because now we finally have a jump for Sora that actually feels good. Because the main jump you get at the base jump you get in the game, it feels very awkward and it's a bit stilted. But now we got a jump that actually feels nice. Not just it gives us more distance, but it also just feels good to use. And it also just hit me for the first time that the high jump is supposed to be a reference to the high jump ability that the Dragoons have in Final Fantasy. Um, and now then, time to talk about my problems with Monstro as a world. And I think Monstro is a world that suffers from two major problems. One, well, I think the environments do have an original imaginative design. They unfortunately look very garish and are hard on the eyes to look at. So it's not a very pleasant world to explore. And two, the different rooms in Monstro all look way too similar to each other thanks to the specific pattern they use for the walls and environment. It's not a really good idea to make all the rooms look the same in a world that's supposed to be a maze. So it makes the whole place a lot more confusing and frustrating to navigate, especially on a first playthrough. Um, Next up, after that we were able to. Well, actually, one more thing. Before we get to the last boss fight of the world, you end up having to climb up a thing. You end up having to climb up a part within Monstro's body, but there's a bunch of enemies that will show up in this place. So right before you have to fight the spawn boss, you basically have to fight waves of enemies, which is frustrating because again you'll end up having to lose HP and MP to fight off these enemies, and you will have to use items after you're done fighting them in order to replenish your HP and MP, which is even worse though when you lose this fight and you have to go through these enemies again. And you can technically skip the enemy just by sort of jumping up, but it can be a bit frustrating to navigate. And I wish they didn't put these enemies here. It's really it's really frustrating to put waves of enemies right before a boss fight, and making it so that whenever you lose against the boss fight, whenever you spawn back, you'll have to fight these enemies again just to get up to the boss. It's just I don't think this was a good idea. They shouldn't have put these enemies here. It's very frustrating. Now then, time to talk about the actual boss fight. I like the cutscene right before the fight where Sora is giving the speech to Riku about how Riku is no longer listening to his conscience and he's doing the wrong thing, and that Sora's going to stay true to his conscience and ideals and do the right thing and save Kairi without having to resort to the nasty toxic Riku's doing. And I like this cutscene because I like how Jimmy himself shows up again, specifically during the speech about conscience, because it's highlighting the thematic connection between Kingdom Hearts and the original Pinocchio movie. I like it, of course, because, of course, it's Sora's sort of own ideals, and we see Sora sort of growing as a person, as a hero, because earlier in the game, he seemed definitely more interested in finding his friends and helping these other people, even though Sora clearly on his own tries to help people because that's just in his nature. His foremost priority was to find his friends, and now he is choosing Pinocchio over Riku because he realizes that Riku's doing the wrong thing and that he doesn't want to harm Pinocchio. We're getting good stuff. But I also like the part of the cutscene where Riku asks Sora to join him. And I think it's interesting because it sort of highlights this idea that as I mentioned before, Riku needs Sora in order to validate himself. And I don't mean the same thing like Riku needs Sora to be his yes man, but rather Riku has sort of become dependent on being better than Sora in a way. Because it is established at the beginning of the game that Riku is better than Sora. He's more talented. And that Riku enjoys this competition he has with Sora. But it's also kind of clear that Riku sort of he has become dependent on the idea of Sora being being Sora's better, that it makes him feel confidence in himself, knowing the fact that he has always been better than Sora, and the fact that Sora has sort of like grown beyond him and is showing his own strength. The fact that he could even grow above Riku is sort of challenging Riku's sort of own sense of identity, his own sense of comfort. So he doesn't. So he doesn't feel comfortable without this sort of codependency, and that's sort of like why I feel like he's asking Sora to join him again. Because the way it's sort of seen in frame doesn't seem like he's asking Sora to join him again as equal, but sort of so that they can have their previous relationship of Sora always following alongside Riku as Riku sort of like did what he wanted to and like sort of act upon it. Like I'm probably not explaining it the best way, but like that's just sort of how it feels that Riku has become codependent on this relationship of him as the superior and Sora as his like he kind of sees himself as the hero and Sora as sidekick, and Sora is now growing into a hero of his own, and that is like damaging Riku's sense of self. So in this scene, he's trying to get Sora to join him again as his sidekick in order to continue validating his own existence in a way. But yeah, after we then get a boss fight with the parasite cage, and we get it's like the last boss fight, and I really don't like this boss fight. It's just really annoying and boring because not only do I think this boss in general just looks kind of lame, it doesn't have a lot of cool attacks, but there's also poison on the walls that you have on the floor. I mean, you have to avoid so that you don't lose damage. The boss has this big AoE attack in which he spews poison on Sora. This frustrating, this difficult to avoid. And you also, for most of the boss fight, his only area of hitting is on his head, which is higher up. So you either have to get on platforms in order to shoot spells on it, or jump up in order to hit it, and it's just sort of frustrating. Also, one of the saving graces of the boss fight is that like you can stun him, in which he opens up his stomach, and then you can attack him there, which does more damage. So there is some ways of mitigating the fight. So I do like how there is this weak point. But other than that, the boss fight is just in general really like annoying to go through. But yeah, after that, we then later get we not only see Sora, Donald, Goofy, and Geppetto and Pinocchio leave Monstro because destroying that Heartless is causing Monstro to have a monstrous sneeze, which launches all of them out of his stomach, which is good. But then we later get a scene of Riku on Captain Hook's ship looking over Kairi's comatose body, and I have to wonder if the reason why Riku is also torn up about Kairi losing his heart is because he feels responsible for it because he was the one who let the Heartless invade Destiny Islands. And that sort of goes later into my earlier comment where it seemed like Riku was projecting his own guilt over failing Kairi onto Sora by him accusing Sora of not caring about Kairi anymore. Which, again, don't know if that's 100% what Nomura and his team was going for, but I definitely think that's the reading you could get from this, and I think it's a very valid one. I also like how after we leave Monstro, we get this scene in which, well, no, wait, it's not specifically just after if you finish Monstro. Actually, wait, I think it is because I'm pretty sure after you defeat Monstro, you get the Stop spell, which is a cool spell, but I feel like it takes a bit too much MP for it to be all that useful. Though there are definitely scenarios later in game in which using Stomp can be very helpful on a boss fight. Everybody knows the cheat strat from Maleficent in Kingdom Hearts, or the Maleficent Dragon boss fight in Kingdom Hearts 1. But yeah, once you get all your spells, you will get this cutscene in which Donald and Goofy tells Sora to visit Merlin, because Sora has unlocked all these spells, which I like because like you need to do this in order to get a new Keyblade. So the game itself is going out of its way to let you know to visit Merlin at this time to make sure you don't miss this new Keyblade, which again I really like. And on the subject of that Keyblade, I love Spellbinder. It's probably one of my favorite Kingdom Hearts 1 Keyblades. I just love the blue color scheme. I like how the blade itself of the Keyblade has this relatively flap shape in comparison to the other blades, which are more round. And I also like how the teeth of it look like the tools you would see a wizard use, like when they're like doing astrology or other sort of magical stuff. And it's also neat how the keychain of the Keyblade is a bookmark. Not a book, an actual book. Yes, like a spell book, I think that's what it's supposed to be, yeah. I then visited the Hundred Acre Woods again because I got a new page. And I really like the scene where Sora meets Piglet for the first time because in general, it's just a really cute scene. I love how Sora sort of bends down to get on to get onto Piglet's level, so he feels more comfortable. And it also, maybe I misheard it. Maybe this wasn't what was actually going on in the performance, but like Sora's voice sounds a lot softer when he's talking to Piglet in the scene. So I get the impression that Sora is trying to act in a calm, nice way so that Piglet won't be scared of him anymore, which I think is just like super cute and super wholesome. So after I finished that visit to the Hundred Acre Woods, I went around Traverse Town for a bit, and I went to Sid's house and I talked to Aerith, and it turns out Aerith will actually bring up Cloud, like asking Sora if she's met him, which I really like this detail because one, Aerith was another character from Final Fantasy VII, which was the game Cloud is from, but it also helps establish that in the Kingdom Hearts version of Cloud was also like from the same world as the other Final Fantasy characters, and that they used to know him, but that he's gone away, which I like. Again, like it's not something a big deal; it's a small detail, but just I like small details like this and stuff. Anyway, we also find out that Pinocchio and Geppetto are now living in Traverse Town after they escape Monstro, and I really like this extra detail which they inform that Leon helped Pinocchio and his dad get a house in Traverse Town, which is just in general super cute. Leon's definitely has a bit of a tsundere quality to him in Kingdom Hearts, where he, despite his attitude, is at his core a big softy who just wants to help people, which I think is really cute. I also love how Pinocchio and Geppetto now live in Traverse Town after you defeat Monstro, because like in all the other Disney worlds, the Disney character Sora's friends stay in their world. Whereas with these two, they end up in Traverse Town, which is the hub world of the game, meaning the player is able to now visit the two frequently throughout the game. Since like every time you finish a world, you want to go back to Traverse Town in order to stock up back on supplies and also to see what's changed. And I really like this because it allows the player to form a stronger attachment with these characters now that they're part of the hub world. And I think it's also really cool because it's like a direct way of showing that Sora isn't just changing the individual worlds he's visiting, but he's also changing the universe itself. Because like if it wasn't for Sora, Pinocchio and Geppetto never would have made it out of Monstro, and they never would have made it to Traverse Town. So it's because of Sora's direct actions that not only were these survivors of the destroyed world able to make it to Traverse Town, which is basically like a sanctuary for those who've lost their homes, but that Sora himself is actively changing Traverse Town through his adventures and through his impact on the other worlds, which is all again really good stuff. I really like stories in which you can see the main character's impact on the world slowly as the story goes on. This idea that they are continuing to change the world. We also get another Keyblade from Geppetto called Wishing Star, and this is another one of my favorite Kingdom Hearts 1 Keyblades. I just love its cobbled together workshop look, like it was something Geppetto himself made. And I also love how it's named after the star that Geppetto wished on that gave Pinocchio his heart. And I think the ability of the Keyblade is really cool, where the final blow of every combo will always be a critical hit. And I sort of have my own headcanon on how this ability works. You see, the teeth on this Keyblade is basically like a wooden gear. So my headcanon is that whenever like there's the final, whenever Sora does the final hit with the Keyblade, the gear like spins around, and that's what causes the critical damage. I don't know if that was what the developers intended, but that's sort of like how I like to interpret the Keyblade and how its ability works. And next up, I'm just going to talk about certain like abilities or gameplay aspects of Kingdom Hearts 1, specifically some of the ones that bug me, but also stuff I like. First off, I love the tech point system in Kingdom Hearts 1, where you get extra experience points if you manage to block an attack, or if you manage to use the right spell on an enemy, like the spell that, like if you use a fire spell on an ice enemy, you'll get tech points because you're using the correct spell that they're weak to. And you also sometimes get tech points if you manage to hit an enemy at the right time in order to deflect an attack or like stun them. And I really like this because it's a nice way the game encourages the player to fight smarter instead of harder in a way that is because like I much prefer where instead of games punishing you for playing wrong, they reward you if you play right. Because this is a really good way to encourage the player to be a lot smarter, not just with guarding and magic, but also in how they sort of time attacks and try to strike it down. And I'm really disappointed that the later games didn't keep the tech point system because I think it's really cool and it's one of the things I really enjoy about Kingdom Hearts 1's combat. But enough about positives. Time to talk a bit about a few negative things. I really don't like the guard in Kingdom Hearts 1. It's probably my least favorite guard in the series because it feels really finicky to use. Like it's too slow. Because like whenever I try to press it, there's a slight delay. there's a slight delay when I press it and when the guard actually goes up. Like an enemy will turn to attack, I'll press the guard button, and Sora will either be too slow or he'll guard right before the actual attack hits, and then the guard will go down and he'll get hit again. And it's just sort of frustrating. Like I don't know, it just doesn't feel right, especially not in like Kingdom Hearts 3, in which the guard is like very quick, very snappy, so it's a lot easier to time it correctly. Whereas in Kingdom Hearts 1, it's a lot slower. It doesn't always feel good, and you can very easily miss. Yes. Also, one thing that I've sort of noticed about Kingdom Hearts design that I'm not a big fan of is the game. I feel like it takes a bit too long to give you things that like you feel like you should have at the beginning of the game, or like stuff that seems like vital to enjoy the game. For instance, like guard and scan are both abilities in which you get them via leveling up, and when you get these abilities, all depends on like which things you pick at the beginning of the game. Like if you pick a sword, shield, or staff, and I'm not a big fan of that because like guard is like your best defensive ability, something you really need in order to deal with avoiding attacks. So like tying it to levels up and sticking at the beginning, it makes earlier parts of the game a lot more difficult than they should be. And scan isn't quite that vital, but I feel like it's important to be able to see your enemy's HP, especially in boss fights, because then you know like what you have a good idea of like not just how far you're getting into the fight, but also let you know like which attacks you have do the best damage. And I feel like not having that can make fights not only feel like they're taking a lot longer, but can also make it a lot harder in order to figure out what exactly the enemy is weak to. Which is why I prefer how later games like give you scan right at the beginning. And there's also stuff like dodge roll, which is like you don't have dodge roll until the end of the first visit to Traverse Town, and that is a bit frustrating because that basically means you have no defensive abilities early on in Kingdom Hearts 1, so it makes it really hard for you to like avoid damage. Like your only way of really like avoiding attacks is to jump. And again, your early jump in Kingdom Hearts 1 doesn't really feel that good, so it's not the best like way to avoid attacks. And like I get why they did this because they wanted Goofy specifically to give you the ability. But I feel like if they wanted you to wait for dodge roll, then they should have given you like guard at the beginning of the game in order to make up for it. So making you wait for guard makes the earlier person games harder because you're lacking any defensive abilities. And if they just gave you like guard or something else, then maybe that would help make up for it. But they don't, so it causes a problem. And it's not the worst thing in the world because again, that's not too long to get the dodge roll, but it is basically like after the prologue game, after the Destiny Island section, and after you've done with the Traverse Town section, in which you'll have to fight a lot of enemies in between, and there are like I think you fight Darkseid twice, so like three boss fights at least. But if we're not counting replay fights, then this too. But in general, these fights definitely do feel a bit harder because you're really lacking in defensive options. And another thing that bugs me is that you don't unlock item synthesis till after Agrabah, which I really don't get. Like, why force you to wait 5 worlds in the game to start like crafting items, synthesis stuff? Which I don't know. I don't get the point of making us wait for something that seems like it would be so handy, and I don't really feel like it improves the game by not letting you craft items earlier in it. I don't know. Maybe they just didn't figure the player. Maybe they didn't want to overwhelm the player by giving them the item sets at the beginning of the game. But like whenever I played later games where you can like basically use the item synthesis like only like an hour or two in, and I never really felt that overwhelmed by it. So I don't get why the game holds off on it in Kingdom Hearts 1. I don't know. Maybe they just didn't figure there'd be enough stuff for you to get to craft your items, not enough synthesis material, but I don't know. I just don't think it was the best idea, and why I'm really glad later games just let you craft stuff only like almost right at the beginning of the game. Also, you have to wait until after Deep Jungle to unlock the ability to teleport to worlds you've already visited. Because beforehand, you just have to redo the gummy ship flight segments to travel between worlds, and that is kind of annoying. I don't get why they don't just give you this teleporting thing from the beginning. Like it's not the worst thing in the world since like again the beside including Traverse Town there's only like there's only like 4 worlds towards the beginning of the game, and you don't have to go too far, but having to redo the gummy ship segments at the beginning every time you want to go to another world is kind of frustrating, and I'm glad they gave you the teleporting option from the get-go in later games with the gummy ships. But yeah, enough about complaints. Now let's talk about the Pegasus Cup in Olympus. And I really like how the final opponents of this cup is Leon and Yuffie, because it's not only a really nice reward for like going down these waves of Heartless, and now you get like a brand new unique boss fight as these Final Fantasy characters, but I also think it's a really good way of showing how Sora has grown. Because like at the beginning of the game, Sora fought Leon, but it was like a Leon that was holding back, and you able to see that Leon wasn't just like lying when he said that. He was actually holding back because you've seen this boss fight that Leon is like using his limit break from Final Fantasy VIII as part of his moveset now, where he creates like a giant sword made out of magic to attack. Like you can really tell that he's holding back. But now that we're fighting a Leon who isn't holding back anymore, we can see how much Sora has grown and become stronger, because now is he not only defeating an enemy he was struggling with beforehand, but he's able to defeat them at full power. So yeah, a nice way of using Sora gameplay to show Sora's progression as a fighter. Really good way. No, and I also love how after you beat the Pegasus Cup, Phil gives Sora a lesson about becoming a hero by telling by telling Sora to figure out what exactly makes his heart strong, because Sora at this point already knows that his powers sort of come from his heart, but Phil wants him to question like what exactly makes his heart strong, which Sora will later figure out the answer after you finish the Hercules Cup, which is later in the game. And again, I really love how Olympus is sort of used to not only help Sora grow as a hero, but sort of help him develop his ideals of the heart and friendship. It's really cool stuff, and I never noticed this in Kingdom Hearts 1 before until like this replay. We also get Strike Raid after finishing the Pegasus, and I love Strike Raid. It's probably one of Sora's best one of his best triangle based abilities, because like Sonic Blade is really good, really quick and fast, and I love using it. But Strike Blade's even better, especially in Kingdom Hearts 1, because when you use it, you're basically invincible every time you throw the Keyblade. So not only does this ability allow you to do heavy damage to an enemy, but it also allowed you to play defensively, because now you're invincible for a certain period during a fight, which again, really like this stuff. And also, just a side point, I do have one bit of a complaint about Sonic Blade in Kingdom Hearts 1, and that is that sometimes the full thing won't move out. Like, sometimes I'll press triangle to activate it, and Sora will do, like, one Sonic Blade attack, and then I'm mashing the triangle so he can do other ones, but he just doesn't do it. Like, he stops after one, and I don't get why this happens. I don't know, maybe it's, like, a problem with, like, Sora's positioning in the game. Like, 'cause I noticed that usually when he stops, it's because Sora, like, hits a wall or something, or he's went past the enemy, it doesn't work. Because I don't think it's tied to MP, because I thought it might be a thing where like it can only go faster if you have more MP. But I've done it on low MP, and I'm still able to do all the repeated slashes of Sonic Blade. So I don't get why it has this problem. But yeah, after the cup, I went back to Pooh's book again because I found it on a page, and we got a chapter in which involving rabbits around involving Pooh visiting Rabbit in order to get more honey and meeting Tigger for the first time. And I like the part where how you can pull out the vegetables in Rabbit's garden beforehand and even find cool items underneath it. It's also just sort of fun to because there's like a really goofy sound effect every time you take out one of the vegetables, so it's just sort of fun to do it. Sorry, bleh, 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 bleh. Okay, okay, back to actually talking about the game. Enough with the mumbling. We can do this. Okay. Now then, there's also a bit where Pooh gets stuck because he's trying to get into Rabbit's house because Rabbit's trying to hide his honey, and Rabbit's just like, nobody's here. Here, and Pooh goes, who is this person named Nobody? And I just laughed because, like, if you're familiar with Kingdom Hearts, like, that is very funny in retrospective. And yeah, but eventually Pooh gets stuck and he can't get out because he eaten too much honey, so he's stuck in a hole and he won't get out of Rabbit's house. So then Rabbit needs to make a carrot juice in order to help Pooh slim down. But the problem is that as he's about to get the rabbits from his garden, Tigger shows up and he starts creating trouble. And I really like how Tigger is introduced because it not only establishes a lot of his well-known character traits, like his bouncing, the way he pounces on characters whenever he comes into a scene, the way he sort of spells his own name. again, they're able to introduce all these iconic parts of his character very quickly and rapidly, but they also do that while establishing his dynamic with Rabbit, because you can clearly see Rabbit's in distress as Tigger accidentally like destroys the bridge to Rabbit's house while bouncing. Yeah, you do a mini game in which you gotta protect the vegetables from Tigger, so Rabbit can make the soup and help get Pooh out. Fun stuff. And now then, we're going to talk about probably everybody's least favorite world in Kingdom Hearts 1. I know it's my least favorite. The Atlantica. I don't know why I was saying the. It's just Atlantica. Now then, let's start off with a few positives. I really like the opening cutscene to Atlantica. Well, actually, no, wait, not opening. Sorry, wrong foot. Okay, I like the cutscene before you enter Atlantica, where it establishes that Donald's magic is the reason why Sora, Donald, and Goofy now have these sea-based transformations. Where like Sora is a merman, Donald is a turtle. No, not turtle. Goofy is a turtle because shells, shield, clever thinking. Donald is instead like an octopus, kind of like Ursula was. Which now I'm just realizing that yeah, they were probably doing a design connection between Donald and Ursula because Donald is using magic just like Ursula. That's pretty clever. Didn't notice that before to now, but like I love clever stuff like that. Now then, um, second up on positive notes, well, Atlantica does suck doo doo. I really love Sora's merman design. It's just a fun design. Like, it's not anything explicit. It's basically just like taking Sora's shirt off and giving him like a mermaid tail. But it is also just sort of cute seeing Sora in these different fun Disney forms. But yeah, now then, for more interesting stuff, I like the beginning cutscene. I mean, I like how the world of Atlantica begins, where Ariel noticed that there's something off about Sora and Co. Sora Yeah. And I think this is interesting because in all the other worlds, the people there just sort of accepted Sora, Donald, and Goofy as like part of the world. They didn't question it. But in this world, we actually do have the character where they realize there's something off with Sora, Donald, and Goofy, and because it's very clear they're not from this world. And I think it's fitting that this is the world in which it happens because Atlantica is a world in which Sora meets a Disney character that wants to leave worlds just like him. And we also meet in this world other Disney characters who know about the existence of Keyblades and other Keyblade wielders. And again, though, it's very interesting that the game starts on this difference between the other worlds in order to sort of let us know beforehand that this world is going to be a bit more different in terms of storytelling in a way that how the other worlds have been. Now, another positive note is I like how Atlantica handles chest because like instead of just giving you the standard chest from like all the other worlds, most of the chests in Atlantica are clams that you need to open either by hitting them or casting spells on them. Whereas when we do see a normal chest in Atlantica instead of the clam, it's usually in a place where it would make sense, such as like the sunken ships or Ariel's grotto, because Ariel, as if you're familiar with the film, likes collecting human things, so it makes sense for those chests to be there. Um, Eventually, we get a cutscene in which Sora, Donald, Goofy, Ariel, and her friends end up retreating to King Triton's palace. And I like how King Triton is defending his palace with his trident because, like, in all these other Disney worlds, like, while the Heartless are, like, invading, you don't get the sense that, like, the people who live in this world are on the defense now because of the Heartless invasions. Whereas this world, it's very clear that um, King Triton is making an active effort to stop the Heartless from continuing invading his world, and it's very clear in this world that the Heartless themselves are treated like a legit threat through their invasion. Like there is this real danger that they could take over and destroy this world. And while the other worlds all hinted to that, it made it very clear that's a possibility. Here, it feels a bit more tangible because we're seeing the characters of this world making an actual effort to defend it, outside of course, like the Disney characters that join Sora's party, which again I really like. But yeah, and I also like how we even see that we find out that Triton has been sending Sebastian on missions to gather intel about the Heartless, showing that not only is Triton making an active role in defending his world against the Heartless by fighting them, but he's also trying to figure out where they're coming from so that they can stop the threat before it's too late. Which again, really good stuff. And it's very fitting that they have King Triton of all characters be the one that take this stance, because it further adds to these hints when we first meet him that he knows way more than he's leading on. Like, it's very obvious that King Triton knows about the Keyblades and keyholes, even before he admits to it. Um, I also Another thing that's interesting, if you talk to Sebastian Will in the palace, he'll mention that Ursula used to be a fortune teller when she lived in the palace. And this is kind of interesting because I don't believe in the movie we ever figure out what Ursula used to do at the palace before she was balanced. So it's kind of cool that we get to see some extra lore that wasn't even in the movies. Um, also, yeah, after that, we later get a scene in which we go to Ariel's grotto, in which she admits to Sora, Donald, and Goofy that she wants to travel to other worlds just like Sora. And I think this is a really clever way of adapting Ariel's desire to visit the surface world from the movie. But it's also interesting because we get to see Sora interacting with another Disney character that shared his dreams. And it is, and I also find it what's interesting is that Sora, he continues to hide the fact that he's from another world from Ursula. And even when he mentioned they used to have that dream, he like again he tries to hide it away. He tries to keep Ariel distracted from it because he doesn't want her to know the truth he's from another world. And I have to wonder if Sora is doing this on some level because he kind of regrets leaving his home world because, well, he does like actually be. Because, well, Sora does seem to be enjoying his Disney adventures somewhat and seeing all these different worlds. You can clearly tell that what he wants to do at the end of the day is just find his friends and go back home. So perhaps Sora is keeping the secret that he's from another world from Ursula, not just to preserve the idea of like world order and stuff, but also because Sora on some level doesn't want Ariel to end up in with the same trouble as he does. Like I don't think this is what they were going for, but this is kind of like how I like to interpret it. Anyway, of course we end up going on a mission to find something in order to help Sora find the keyhole. And then part of that mission we end up going to a second ship in which we end up getting attacked by a shark mini boss who, like the jaguar from Deep Jungle, will show up in different parts of the world in which you can find him multiple times. But when they first introduce him, he's like attacking the gang while they're in the ship, similar to the movie. And I really like how they use the camera angles during this part of the game because of because they frame it kind of like the shark is like a slasher movie villain, so it does this really cool effect where the characters are on the offense and like I don't know, it's not that big a deal, but I just sort of like the way the effect it sort of does. But yeah, after you deal with that mini boss, you end up finding this crystal Triton in which you bring it back to Ariel's grotto in hopes of using it to find the keyhole. But again, Triton ends up destroying it in a fit of rage, which upsets Ariel even further and forces her to run away. And then King Triton reveals that not only does he know Sora, Donald, and Goofy aren't from this world, but he knows what the Keyblade is. And this is really interesting, especially with the context of later games, because okay, gonna talk about later games for a bit. I know this podcast is supposed to focus just on Kingdom Hearts 1, but I will talk about later games when I think it is relevant. And it's so interesting the fact that Triton knows about the Keyblade wielders because it makes me wonder, like, was he there during the original Keyblade War? Is that why he's so aware of them? Or is it possible that he met Xehanort and Ericus some days ago in their youth? Or hell, maybe King Triton wasn't there during the Keyblade War, but maybe, like, his ancestors were and they knew about it, and that's sort of, like, why he knows. Just sort of interesting things. And I doubt Nomura will ever really go into this later, but if we do find out, like, who are these figure out like how Triton knows about the Keyblade wielders and about the damage they can do to worlds, I would love to see it. But yeah, back to the Just Kingdom Hearts 1, dude. My favorite part of this scene in which King Triton knows about the Keyblades is that he basically implies to Sora that Keyblade wielders are not always heroes and that they might even be a greater threat than the Heartless, saying that wherever the Keyblades go, they bring about chaos and destruction. So it's very much King Triton hinting that Keyblade wielders themselves might actually be the true source of conflict within the world of Kingdom Hearts, which later games go into this a lot. So I really like how Triton, of all characters, is the one that sets up this thought in the player's head that's going to be majorly important in future games. Ariel working with Ursula actually makes a bunch of sense in how Kingdom Hearts does this story because it's not just her father's harsh actions that drives her to accepting Ursula's help, but it's the knowledge that Sora and Co. have been keeping the fact that they're from other worlds a secret from her. She thought they were her friends, even going as far as to tell them about her dreams to see other worlds, but not only have they been lying to her from the start, but they could have helped her realize her dream this entire time and did nothing. To Ariel, it's like they've been laughing behind her back the entire time. There could be no greater betrayal than this. So it makes Ariel's sort of hasty actions to work with Ursula make that much more sense in characterization wise. Which I really like that stuff. I didn't notice this until like I replayed the game, but it just sort of came to me as I was watching the cutscene, and I thought it was like so interesting. But anyway, yeah, Ariel ends up helping Ursula get Triton's Trident, which ends up causing big danger because it turns out Ursula's a bad guy, of course, and she's just using Ariel to get the Trident so she can take over the seas. And now before you go to fight Ursula, Trident ends up giving you a tip for the first Ursula Burst fight, which I like, which is basically like use your magic on her cauldron to like not only hurt her but stun her so you can continue fighting. And now then, let's talk about the problems with Atlantica and why it sucks as a world. The biggest problem I have with this world is how limited your moveset is. Most of your abilities aren't usable. Dodging attacks is a lot harder until you get the mermaid kick, which isn't until near the end of the world, and you can't block attacks. So and not to mention, your normal combo is replaced with a much more basic combo that is not only shorter than the combo you get with your abilities, but also just doesn't do as much damage. You also, of course, can't do like Strike Raid or Sonic Blade or any of that other stuff. So all these aspects lead together, create a world where fights end up taking much longer and are a lot more difficult. Now you can, of course, rely on magic to help subside this, which does help, especially with certain enemies, which using magic, because they're like these jellyfish heartless, where if you defeat them with a normal physical attack, they'll burst into multiple more smaller ones. But if you use magic, that gets rid of them for good. So I definitely feel like they wanted you to like go through this world relying mostly on magic. But if you don't have a magic build, you're basically screwed when going through this world. Which is, I definitely feel like why a lot of people have problem with Atlantica and Kingdom Hearts 1. Not just the problems I listed before, but I get the feeling that most people probably picked the sword first. So they ended up getting a build that it was a lot more difficult. It is also because of these problems why I think the boss fight against Giant Ursula is such a pain, because it takes all the problems of the world I mentioned beforehand and applies them to a boss that uses primarily AoE attacks, which is a big problem because, of course, again, well, you do get the dolphin kick right before this boss fight, but even then, the dolphin kick isn't reliable enough to avoid the pillars of lightning she uses throughout her fight. And again, you can't guard, so the only way you can protect yourself against this is to rely on Cure Guard, which is a thing you can really only do in Kingdom Hearts 1, where, like, if you have the ability to Leaf Bracer, which makes you invincible when casting Cure, you can basically cast Cure before an enemy is trying to hit you, and it'll work as a guard. And this works well in Kingdom Hearts 1 because in Kingdom Hearts 1, Cure doesn't deplenish all your MP. But that isn't really like a good system, and having to rely on this for one boss fight is really frustrating. Now, of course, casting Arrow too can also help, since Arrow works as a auto guard, will sometimes auto guard some attacks. But again, though, like having to rely on these spells for an entire boss fight is really frustrating, especially if you don't have a magic build or you have low MP. Yeah, and just the boss fight against Giant Ursula really isn't fun. It's like, because you end up having to get close to her in order to deal any damage, because you have to get up right in her face, and that's the only part where you can hit her. Which is, like, annoying, especially because, like, Ursula will oftentimes have the lightning pillars show up near her head, so you end up having to put yourself in a lot of danger just to hit her. And it also doesn't help that she has this attack where she can suck you in and try to bite you. And even with the mermaid kick, it is really difficult to get out of it. So it oftentimes like you have to give up and just let Ursula hit you so you can move on with the boss fight. In general, it's one of the worst Kingdom Hearts boss fights in the series. Also, I forgot to mention about the boss fight against Norma Ursula before this, where it's not too bad. It's definitely better than the Giant Ursula boss fight, but having to deal with the cauldron is a bit tricky, because sometimes the cauldron will deflect your magic, and then sometimes the magic will hit the cauldron, which will cause this explosion to hurt Ursula. And it feels kind of inconsistent, because at first I thought I was just like using the spell, this like if it's red, then you use an ice spell and that'll do it. And sometimes that worked, but also sometimes it didn't. and then sometimes it seemed like I had to wait until the thing like turned green and like was fuzzing, and then sometimes that would cause the explosion, sometimes it didn't. I don't know. Maybe I need to check the wiki to figure out how exactly the cauldron thing works. But it felt pretty inconsistent when I was actually playing the game. Anyway, after you defeat Ursula and give King Triton his trident back, King Triton reveals that the crystal trident. Man, I'm saying trident a lot. Trident, 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 trident. Blah, 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 blah. Sorry about that. I thought it'd be funny, but it probably wasn't. Anyway, basically find out that the crystal trident is a device capable of revealing the location of the world's keyhole. And I find that interesting because I don't think we ever get this brought up again in any of the Kingdom Hearts games or even later in Kingdom Hearts 1. This idea of items that are capable of revealing a world's location. I wonder if Nomura might bring something like this back in the future. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But I would like it if he does because I think this is sort of an interesting idea. I wonder because Nomura does have a habit of like introducing something in one game and then explaining the lore behind it years later. Even if something's small and influential, he'll still like reveal it. Even if it doesn't seem like it has much story relevance in the game itself you're playing, you'll end up figuring out that actually no, it has massive lore implications later on. And I really like that about Kingdom Hearts and Nomura as a writer. Like he never lets an idea stay dead. He's always gonna find a way to use it later. Anyway, last point about Atlantica. I like how the location of the keyhole was in Ariel's grotto, because not only does it place the keyhole in a location that is both important to Ariel in the original movie, but there's also the implication that Triton brings up that Ariel herself was drawn to that location because of the keyhole and her desire to leave other worlds. That the reason why Ariel chose this spot in particular to be her sort of like hideout for her collection was because she was subconsciously drawn to the keyhole, which I really like that element. That's really cool. The keyholes themselves don't really show up much in later Kingdom Hearts games, which I think makes sense. They're not really necessary to the plot outside of really Kingdom Hearts 1. But I do really like the implication, what they do with the keyholes in Kingdom Hearts 1 itself. Yeah. But that's it for so far for my replay of Kingdom Hearts 1. Originally, I was planning to finish um, Halloween Town before I did this video, but I ended up making so many different notes on just like the second visit to Traverse Town, Atlantica, Monstro, and Agrabah that I felt like I wanted to get the podcast out soon because I already had this much material. And if I did Halloween Town, this podcast would be even longer. And while I do like making long videos for you guys, there's also definitely a limitation how much I'm capable of making. But yeah, I don't know what the next week's podcast will be. Maybe it'll be another episode on Sorobote Must Be Destroyed, or maybe I'll find another comic or show or movie or manga I want to talk about. But yeah, if I ever for the next not next week's episode, but for the next part of the Kingdom Hearts 1 replay, I think my goal is probably go to Halloween Town, um, Neverland, and the first visit to Hollow Bastion. That's what I'm planning to cover in the next episode. I mean, not next episode, the next part of the Kingdom Hearts 1 replay, and then probably after that, I should hopefully have a final part. Yeah, that probably won't be the next week's episode because I still got a lot of stuff to go through. But yeah, thanks everybody for watching my podcast. I hope you enjoy it, and if you did, please like and subscribe, and I hope you have a lovely day. Bye, everyone!